So yeah, so the last one I finished up blasting this and just get a bit of paint on it. It's looking good. You know, a few dings and stuff on it, but that's the way it's going to be. For the most part, I'm very happy with how that finish is turning out. So, what I'm going to do now is first things first. I'm going to get the hone set up. Now that I got the outside of this jug cleaned up, we're going to go ahead and hone the inside surface of this. It's looking really good. There aren't really many bad marks or anything in there, so we're going to hone this. Got some rapid tap there, so we'll soak the hone stone, soak the inside of this, hone it. Then once that's done, we're going to go ahead and pressure wash all of these components, and that way we'll be then ready to give them a quick dry off. I'll just use the heat gun to dry in around like any bearings or anything that gets that might get wet, and get a bit of oil on those bearings so they don't rust. Any other steel components like the valve heads here, whatever you want to call them, things the springs go down over. And then we'll tape up all these outside surfaces. So I'll just run tape like this. We'll get this all taped up, and then we're ready to get these painted. And once they're dry, we can finally get things reassembled. So I also went out today and picked up a new piston ring set for this motor. This was $55. It's a expensive thing to be at, but once I get this honed out and get these new pistons in, or these new piston rings in, and get it broken in and seated, this thing should have oodles of compression. Should be just like new. So let's get some honing done. So in this angle, you can just see the crosshatch pattern that's in there now. You can see it's not all glossy like it was before. We got the nice crosshatch there. So now I believe that should be good enough for our rings to set in on when we reassemble the motor. So I'm going to bring this stuff outside, give it one good final blast off with the pressure washer to make sure there's no more glass bead on anything. Then we're going to dry everything off, tape it up, and get some paint on it. So one thing I need to take care of is a couple broken parts of the case here. So you can see one part here is broken off. This holds the chain guard on right here. So I need to get a bolt with some Vaseline on it. Get that screwed in there. Pound some JB weld down over this and hope it takes to these edges. I did clean these up with the bead blaster, so it should have something to take onto. And the same thing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, I've got a marker that just fits in this hole. So I'm going to slide the marker in, some paper around it, get some JB weld on this stuff. And we'll leave this one overnight. Oops, sorry about that. We'll leave this overnight to cure up, hopefully, while we get the other parts taped up and painted. So let's go ahead and get some JB weld mixed up and get this here. See if we can't get this metal fixed up. So I went ahead and put a bolt down inside this and packed a bunch of the JB weld down into it, and then I pressed in on this and unscrewed the bolt out so it put the thread in the JB weld, and it seemed to be working well. Now I got this built up from like here to here with JB weld as well, so I'm going to try to get this pen and marker out now without moving the JB weld. There we go. So now we're going to give this 24 hours to cure. In the meantime, I'm going to go get the other components taped off and ready to hit with paint. Okay, let's hit this with a first coat of paint and see how it looks while we're waiting for JB Weld and not wanting to tape stuff up yet. Now that looks really good. I really like the look of that silver. It's going to make the engine look very, very nice indeed. So here's a quick trick when you got something taped. Instead of trying to go around this with an X-Acto knife, get every exact, take something metal, like this small precision screwdriver. You can see how I'm getting a fine line here. All I'm doing is I'm rubbing it, line to edge, and the actual edge is what's cutting up through the tape. This makes this go a lot quicker than just trying to cut all this off with an X-Acto knife. So keep that in mind if you ever want to tape something up like this, and just makes it a lot easier to get that tape off. Anyways, I'll bring you back when I'm ready to paint these components. So I went ahead and shaped down this spot I built up earlier. It's mostly decent. It's good and flat for the most part, you know, flat enough for my purposes. But this whole big crack where it was gone to the top is filled in now. So if I hold the chain guard in against here, let me just hold it here. You can see the fit there's pretty decent, I think. Good enough for me anyway. So the back piece here, the motor mount, I'm going to give that a bit more time to cure overnight because I found that this one was still a bit damp when I got down into some of the material. So I'll give this one until tomorrow. We'll shape that, tape that, and then make that look like all these nice shiny motor components. If I get this to focus. Okay, so I've got these two holes shaped pretty much the way I want them shaped. Bit of a quick touch on the inside here. Yeah, I don't think these get much better than that. I don't want to push my luck here either. It is only JB Weld. So, I'm going to go ahead and get this taped up and ready for some paint. So I'm ready to go ahead and lap the valves. The intake valve is pretty much good. So what I'm going to do is for the intake side, I'm just going to go straight to a bit of lapping compound thinned out. So I'll use, grab a Q-tip here, a little blob of the compound. We'll mix that in with some light oil just to thin it out a bit. So I don't think we need it as coarse on this side. So that's what we'll use for the intake side, and then on the exhaust side we'll just use straight up lapping compound for the first go because of the carbon and whatnot that's built up on the seat of the valve where it seats into the head. into the valve seat, you know, that's what it's called. So I'll do this one first, so we'll go rough, then smooth, and then we'll just do the smooth stuff on the intake. So here goes. So I want to try to get a good zoomed in view of the exhaust valve port here. So you can see now the valve is nice and silver. So what I did was I did a good polish using the coarse paste, and what I did was, let me zoom back out for a second. Zoom back out. What I did was, when the valve is down through the valve guide, I can actually get my drill on the end of the valve. So I very carefully in and out against that surface. So now there's literally no pitting left on this surface here, and the same goes for on the valve itself. This should be a lot better than it was. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick lap with the intake using the finer stuff first step, and then we'll have a look at both of them just to see how things turned out. So I'll bring you back shortly. So I finished up lapping on the valves. The exhaust side is really good, like almost new good. And the intake side still has just a very tiny little bit of a pit here, but I don't think that's going to be entirely too bad. I'm going to go ahead and put a plug in this now, lay the valves in, push them all the way down, and see if I can't just do a bit of a leak test on this to see if fluid will stay in there or not. So all I've got kicking around, I don't have any extra gas kicking around because I haven't filled up a gas can in ages. I just filled this up with some quick start, so I'm going to dump this into the head and make sure the valves are sealing. So I put in a plug, I got my valves in, so I'll just top it off there, dump the rest of that out, and hopefully it won't leak on us. I picked it up earlier and looked when I had it filled up last time. I didn't see anything running down the valve stems or anything. So I'm pretty sure we're good to go. So one of the last things, or probably the last thing I need to do now before I start reassembling the motor, is I need to fix the spark advancer. So the issue I have is when I took this off the bike, see, these can move slightly. It gives, or slows it down. So I guess they act like a brake, so that way the timing is right when you're starting the bike or something along these lines. Either way, there's supposed to be a spring connecting from here to here. Right, let me get that white behind it so you can see the hole from here to here. And as well, there's supposed to be a spring from here to here. Now there's rubber around this to keep the spring from being chafed against the metal, and same thing on this side. When I took this apart, this was the only piece of spring that was left. So you can see that's a pretty sad piece of spring. Focus. Please focus. There it is. So that was the only thing left for spring. So I looked up some stuff on making springs, and the primary source was this old Tony's channel here on YouTube. One of my favorite subs to watch. Either way, so what I did was I grabbed some guitar string that's essentially the same size as that spring wire is. Usually music string, piano wire, guitar wire, guitar strings will work for this. So essentially what I did was, as a test, I anchored one piece in a set of vice grips, put those vice grips in my vise. On the other side of things, I had a precision screwdriver and a smaller set of vice grips with the wire nipped onto that, and I just twisted and rolled it in. And so I'm at the point now where I've got this little spring, and it's, you can see it can spring, it springs back the way it should be. So every time I pull it out. So now, like, there's a science to making springs. I am not even going to be considering anything scientific. I'm going to make a spring that I think is going to be enough to hold that thing as it is, and we'll see how it goes. I mean, it didn't have a spring before and worked, so I mean, putting a spring there has at least helped, even if it's a bit tight. So I'll get things set up for making my springs, and then you guys can follow along. Here's the spark advancer now. I got it all cleaned up. My new springs are in and those are working as expected. Here's a bit of rebound on that one. Bit of rebound on that one. So that's done and good now. We'll stick this one back in the CDI bag for when that's ready to go back together. So I went ahead. I've got this Cleveite assembly lube, so I'm making sure I get some assembly lube on the bearings, down around some of the gears and the transmission, the kicker and whatnot. So now what I want to do is I'm just going to test fit or dry fit the right side of the bottom end over the left side here. I just want to make sure everything is going together properly. And when I'm content that I've got the bottom end back together the way it should be, make sure it's in neutral here, then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and get that side on as well, and then we should be good to take it back off, get our gasket in place, and we'll go ahead and we'll get the bottom end of the motor put together. So let's try to fit that up. Okay, so the bottom end is together. I don't have any screws in it yet. I just want to make sure that things are rotating free. So you see we're good here on the transmission. The crankshaft is good. So now at this point I just want to hand tighten in a few bolts, and then we should be ready to crisscross pattern tighten this down, and our bottom end is back together. So one last thing before I finish up for tonight, because it's about 25 after 9 right now. I want to go in and have a couple beer, play some video games, you know, the usual. So I went ahead and got the chain tensioner assembly all together. My new tensioners, shiny new tensioners on. I just got the stuff laid on here for now because it's going to need to be adjusted again. So I guess the next thing I'll be looking at in the morning is going to be, I guess we're going to start getting our jug and stuff on and start getting everything, the top end put back together. So I'll see you guys in the morning. So next on the list is our shifter mechanisms. So we're going to go ahead and get that stuff installed here now. So that's the shifter assembly reinstalled. I believe next we are moving on to good question. We're moving on to the clutch next. So let's go ahead and get the clutch into the bag and get it installed. There's a bit of gasket material left on the centrifugal oil filter here. So what I did was I just laid some 1000 grit down on my flat bench surface. I just did this after I scraped a bit of it off and it gave me a nice smooth surface. So now the gasket should take to that really nice. So let's go ahead and get this on. There we go, we got our right side cover on. Now we should be good to turn it over and have a look at putting the alternator and whatnot on. So let's get it twisted around and we'll go ahead and we'll get that stuff installed as well. So one thing I just noticed is that the neutral wire is just too short to stick back down. You probably can't see that. Okay, so here's the neutral wire, and there's where it connects to. And there's a connector on the inside on the shifter drum that touches this on the inside so it knows when it's neutral. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly solder a piece of wire in this. I'm going to cut it back here, get some clean wire, solder a longer piece of wire in, get it shrink wrapped, and then get that plugged into there so we know that's taken care of. Unfortunately, I can't get solder to stick to this wire. It's just like the copper is corroded. There's like a light layer of corrosion on the outside on up through, and I just cannot get it to stick. And I don't want to go and pull this entire thing apart or try to feed a new cable in through for that pin. So I'm just going to go ahead and strip the end of this, tie them together, and then get them shrink wrapped so they shouldn't come apart. Okay, so there's that neutral wire tucked away and hooked up where it needs to be hooked up to. We'll see if that works. I guess once we get the lights on, we got the bike in neutral. We'll see if the neutral light comes on the cluster. So the clearance calls for between 8 and 16 thou. I've got my 12 thou feeler gauge here, and it just goes in there. Let me see if I can slide it again. Here we go. So I'm in the gap there now at 12. I tried a 13, the 13 won't go. So this is a 12 thou gap. So we're well within the 8 to 16 thou. So I'm going to check the other rings, and then we should be good to get those rings on the piston. Okay, let's get the piston installed on the connecting rod. So here's our piston, there's our new rings, everything's lubed up with assembly lube for the most part. So we should be good to go ahead and get this in and on here. The piston is marked in, you see that right there. That needs to you need to make sure that's toward the intake side. And there we go. There's our piston installed. Now I can go ahead and get the clips on that, and we should be good to get the jug on. So thankfully my buddy John popped by and he gave me a hand getting the cylinder on, as it probably would have been near impossible for me to do this by myself. It was quite a pain in the nuts for him and I to do it together. Either way, that's on. We've got our tensioners in place, our guide and our tensioner in place. So the next thing I'm going to want to do now is I'm going to want to get the springs on the valves, and we're going to go ahead and get the head installed on this. So I'm going to bring the head over to the bench, and we'll get the valves on, or get the valves lubed up, get the new valve seals and all that good stuff in there. And we'll go ahead and we'll get our valve springs on and get the head done, and then we should be ready to stick it back on top of this. So I went ahead and sacrificed the 17mm socket so I can make something to compress these springs, so I can get my keepers on and get my valve springs installed. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm just using a C-clamp with this and the C-clamp like this. I then compress the valve and I can get my keepers in through the space here. So I'll do that now so you guys can see it. make things a little easier working on getting the cam and stuff in, I went ahead and just took off the alternator rotor and stuff like that, so that way I can see my chain is still on and engaged on the thing there. The tensioners are both, the tensioner and the guide are both where they need to be. I adjusted this down for maximum slack for now, and we'll adjust that to tighten it up once we get things running. So, I'm going to continue on and get the top end on the cylinder head now. Okay, so at this point I've got the motor mostly back together. The one thing I want to do now is I'm going to go ahead and get this RTV off first. But what I need to do now is just do the valve adjustment. Right now the intake valve is pretty tight and there's barely any room on the exhaust valve. They need to be both adjusted to have 2 thou clearance. So I'm going to go ahead and get those adjusted now. So my goal for today was to finish the assembly on the motor, so I would have been putting the CDI and whatnot back on. That's all that is left for the reassembly on this motor. But when I opened up my bag of CDI parts, I realized that I didn't paint my covers, so I hadn't blasted them and painted them. So I went ahead and I blasted and painted. Now I want to give these until tomorrow to dry before I start putting them back on the motor. So the thing is, along with the silicone gasket that we put around the valve cover, between the valve cover and the head, we're going to have to wait till tomorrow before we can start kicking this over and try to get it running again anyways. So that being the case, I'm going to call it for this one. I want to thank you guys for watching, and when we see you in the next one, we'll be putting this motor on the test jig, ensuring that it works, and when it runs, it'll be going in that thing there. Once again, thanks for watching.